Hello everyone and welcome to the 7th session of the Pattern Language course. Today we shall be hearing from our guest lecturer, Professor Victor Munõz Sanz from the TU Delft University in the Netherlands. He will be sharing about the pattern language, its innovations and applications at the university in TU Delft, but also in the Netherlands. So stay tuned.
It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Victor Munõz. He's an assistant professor of urban planning, and he's working with the Faculty of Architecture and Built Environment in TU Delft. So we highly welcome you, and we look forward to hearing from you. And I hope we are going to take one or two things that will impact our lives as professionals and also as future academicians. Thank you so much for coming.
I will start first with a confession that when I first got to know about the pattern language some years ago, I didn't know too much about it. And I have to say I was a bit skeptical about it because I some way confused it with the idea of a toolbox. So as a series of solutions that you can basically take and use in a project, and in a way it was simplifying design. But then I began working in a project, which I will explain later, and that became a revelation about the strength of the pattern language if we look at it differently. So I will talk about three things. The first is that project, which is called Cities of Making, which was the one that introduced myself to the pattern language, and also a project in which we developed what I consider is an innovative way of using pattern language as well. Which then the second part is about what were the innovations of that project. The one is about pattern language as a way to integrate knowledge and evidence from different disciplines, and then pattern language as a way to engage with stakeholders, with other actors in a design process. So this project Series of Making deal with the question of urban integration of manufacturing. I'm talking, of course, of the European context in which industry, manufacturing, has been moved out of cities. So all of manufacturing in Europe mostly happen in peripheries, or even in other countries. And so we lost a lot of jobs, a lot of skills, and of course it becomes very difficult in the context of sustainability transitions and the idea of having smaller cycles and a smaller time between production and consumption. One needs to think about how do we manufacture things closer to home. So that was the starting point of this project. And it was a collaboration between many different institutions, including universities, research think tanks, companies. And it was for the site of TU Delft, the team was formed by Professor Han Meyer, Birgit Hausleiner, a colleague of mine, and myself. So, as I was saying, industry, especially after the Industrial Revolution, had a very negative connotation. The impact of industry in cities was very negative. It was about pollution, it was about crowding, overcrowding, about logistics, and it was about mess in the city. And indeed, if you take this kind of image on the slide, you maybe have those images of like the chimneys polluting and people living in basically very poor conditions, working in the factory long hours. And as a reaction to that, modernism in the 1930s and 40s, they developed what you know as functional zoning. So basically, let's separate functions to avoid conflict. So like housing happens here, industry happens there. And if you see the legend of that map, indeed, there is a very clear distinction about where things should be positioned in the city and avoiding all type of mix. Although that was the trend that was prevalent in most of the Western countries, and also then later exported to basically all around the world, still there were some pockets of industry manufacturing in cities. In this case, is an image of Rotterdam in the 1970s, in which within the urban landscape, one still could see a workshop with people working, making furniture or repairing cars. But the next stage on urban transformation was what we call urban renewal, in which housing was deemed, let's say, not appropriate anymore. Maybe let's say one needed to attract more investment, bring new residents into the city, and former neighborhoods were erased, and new housing was built. And as a result, all that diversity on the plinth, on the ground floor, in which one could have housing, but also small shops, small makers doing things, will disappear, and one could see, like, if you go many of the neighborhoods in Rotterdam, if you go the side streets, they are quite monotonous. There is not so much activity going on. And then other bigger industrial areas, in the case of Rotterdam, also the port of Rotterdam, were also redeveloped and transformed into the service economy. And that was the last kind of stage into getting rid of everything that meant some sort of like a production or messiness in the city towards a new economy. Now we are in a moment of many transitions. So we have the challenge of climate change. We have ambitions for resilience, for circular economy. There is talks about the third industrial revolution, which is based on machines, sensors, technology, and even the next economy. And that means, of course, lots of possibilities in terms of activities and jobs that could come back to cities and support that ambitions, because that makes, let's say, production local, and the cycles of consumption and production as well become smaller. So our project had these values. So we didn't want to bring back to cities any industry. We wanted to have a very specific idea of what kind of industry we wanted to facilitate. And it was based on the idea of making industry that the city needs, basically provide services to people, and making that needs the city, basically making that can fit on local skills, local materials, local resources, and kind of have that interaction. And also that making that was compatible with the urban context, in the sense of that it acknowledged existing networks, people, policy, that it used circularity and technology, so it's clean, and therefore it doesn't have a huge impact on the environment, and that is integrated in the urban settings. So the team in Delft, we work on the central part, the urban integration. So if you could, let's say, the more physical dimension of manufacturing. We follow different methods for this work, and I will go now into them, but they involve, for example, fieldwork, analysis of time in the development in time of manufacturing locations, also big data analysis and design testing. So, for example, by doing this kind of analysis, one could have access to identifying type of spaces, types, what was the relation between accessibility, density, and the function, the urban function, and identify concepts as borders, as centrality. So how industry is located in city depending to those dimensions, to how it's attached to certain urban edges, or when it needs some centrality because it needs clients, for example. So we can identify some conditions which are stable, that let's say that you can identify that certain type of activities always tend to locate in similar conditions, and others that are more dynamic, that are in between, that allow some change. And in this kind of sense, we kind of see like the importance of some of the old structures of the environment, infrastructures that in a way condition the way industry relates to the built environment. So in a very clear way, let's say, noisy manufacturing or manufacturing which is more active tends to collocate in edges linked to infrastructure, so that there is on the one hand a relationship of mutual necessity, but also elements as noise and pollution get kind of counteracted because of the infrastructure. Also, we identify how in certain industries, due to technology, there is processes of upscaling and transformation of the built environment. And in general, we identify these typical locations that also have to do with different ways of seeing industry, which will have industries which are very local, very central, that need indeed movement and people next to them. One could have these long structures, long lines in the landscape, high street, for example, in which is about movement, about having dependent on that kind of movement of people and flows as well of mobility. And the periphery, which is indeed about when one needs more space. And of course, that's a system that is connected and that connects issues such as skills, resources, and infrastructure. We also saw how there was a diversification of activities and locations through time, and how some structures of the urban form, like main streets again and edges, organize the differences in functions. We did a classification of what we thought were the main trends in manufacturing in Europe, to kind of organize our ideas about what kind of industry we wanted to facilitate, and then based on that also develop scenarios. So each one of these 4 quadrants requires a different spatial organization of work and a different place in the city. So one could see that in the way things are going with making, there is a gradient of companies that operate, let's say, from producing one single product to having a more diversification of functions, of services. So they provide the product, but also the marketing, and it becomes like a service that people can use. So it's like a higher level of manufacturing. And then you also have companies which, let's say, have their own technology and don't share it, and others that share some of the resources. For example, maybe you know a fab lab in which there is like a workshop with machines, and different companies can use the machines for manufacture, and nobody owns the machines. Basically, they are shared by everybody. So we look at different cases to understand indeed how what kind of special conditions and situations were connected to those types of industries. For example, in this case, we have an industry that will go in the no sharing and monofunctional making. So basically, they produce one thing, in this case, plants, and they don't share technology. But so still, they want to have they have certain needs. They have to have an attractive look in the space, or a public face that is attractive for clients. They need large space for production. They also need to have a possibility of growth. So if the business is successful, to be able to expand their premises. And they also need premises for employees who maybe have different skills. In this case, for people who work in IT, because all these companies are highly digitalized. So one needs to introduce not only the manual workers, but also give space for workers who maybe need a more kind of a conventional office space. In this case, we have another company, which is a small hybrid company, which they do design and manufacturing, and they recycle plastic to 3D print urban furniture. So, and they work in kind of a shared space. So again, they also need a public face. They need a place where clients can come, like a showroom kind of a space in which they can see their designs. So that means they prefer some centrality in the city. They don't want to be in the periphery. They want to be something more central because it's like a mix between a shop and a workshop. So that creates some challenges in the sense of like cities allowing to have that mix of, you know, a shop that also produces objects. They also prefer some sort of creative workplace. So in this case, they work in this shared co-working space, which have provided them with shared services. So let's say they have, of course, shared internet, shared infrastructure, shared canteen, and also the possibility of them providing a new technology, the 3D printer, which others can also use in time. Another case is this workshop that is meant to recycle wood in order to repurpose it into furniture. And here the difference, the hybridity of the business is that one can go to learn how to build a furniture, how to make it yourself. And so it's a mix between education and manufacturing. So it's a business that has a very, let's say, low profit. So it needs to have a space which is big but affordable. It has to be messy because it's about getting also flows of wood and materials. So zoning needs to allow for that kind of messiness. But also it has to be accessible to the community because in the end it's about learning. So a community around it has to be able to access and be close to that. We did, in collaboration with another institution, some research on the current needs of makers as well. And that was something that we also took for our research in terms to understand what are the conditions that manufacturing needs and that they actually use, not just based on our imagination, but based on evidence. I will not go into them because in a way this is not relevant to the argument I want to make, but it was very illuminating to see indeed that there are challenges that are very important that can have very much to do with urban planning, in the sense that business needs space, but the space in cities is expensive, and also it's very difficult for a company to get long-term security in a space, meaning that if they don't have security, it's harder for them to make investments and therefore grow. So the question of how do we give security to businesses to locate in certain locations is very important. We then took some of these findings from the special analysis, but also from the, let's say, more interview and analysis to do some design scenarios of how could these transitions between living and working could look like. And that has to do as well with current legislation about, safety considerations concerning proximity of industry with housing, depending on the activity you make. So some industries cannot be at all mixed with housing because they are dangerous. There can be explosions, for example, but others could get closer to them. No? So that was a way to develop this gradient of activities. And we, let's say, we noticed that there was three main points that were important. One is that the context matters, so special context matters, so that one can take advantage of certain place conditions to, let's say, to organize better the mix. Again, here talking about infrastructure, about physical edges in the city. That things are interscalar, that there are different connections between scales and between kind of larger structures in the city, and that also the local scale matters a lot. In this case, we know that we have dikes to contain the water, to keep us dry against the water. So this height difference could be used, for example, to create a way to organize a mixed use, because you could push manufacturing towards the dike and then build on top housing, for example. And then you have two levels of mobility or logistics that could indeed allow for that coexistence between functions. So we ended up with this diagram that talks about this interscalarity and multidimensional aspect of manufacturing. And in a certain condition of complex transformation of urban areas, again, with the challenge of how do we combine activities and what is the right scale to achieve this idea of good neighbors between manufacturing and housing. And all in all, what it resulted is that we needed some sort of to develop not so much one solution, but an instrument to guide stakeholders in answering these questions in a more flexible manner. We in Delft had knowledge of one dimension, the dimension of space. But of course, the project was a collaboration with other two institutions, scientific institutions working on different topics. So the diagram was much more complicated. And then it became a very challenge on how do we speak the same language between, somebody working in industrial ecology and somebody working in geography with a designer. Each one of these three people understands the space in a different way. But then there were, of course, interactions between, we noticed these interactions. So then we got into the question of, maybe we can consider the pattern language as a way to connect and find synergies between all this knowledge from different disciplines. So here I will say some things that probably you know, because I'm guessing that also Priscilla have talked to you about it. What is the pattern language? Comes from this book of Christopher Alexander. And in a nutshell, a pattern is a regularity based on qualitative observations. And what are those regularities and how do we identify them? It's about human behavior. It's about observations in fieldwork, and about being always contextualized in a local scale. And these patterns are not individual agents, they are from a language. So patterns always relate to other patterns. And one example, for example, about this idea of regularity and let's say context-based condition is this one in which you have, I don't know, you have in your mind New York, Manhattan, with this grid that is north-south grid. So it's very clear which side of the street is the sunny side and which side of the street is the dark side. It's always, let's say, one side will be always in the shade, one will be always sunny. So street vendors always put themselves on the sunny side. And that's a pattern, it's a condition that repeats through time and that responds to a problem. A street vendor wants to be attractive to clients. In a cold day, it's better to be attractive when you have a sunny situation in which you can eat outside, eat your hot dog outside. And also for themselves to be more comfortable, it's better to be in a sunny condition because you're going to be long time on the street. But it's contextual. In a different context, like Venice, for example, in Italy is much hotter. So there, people prefer to keep the wine and the drinks on the shade because then it's more comfortable. So the urban pattern language tells us the meaning of urban patterns and how they should be combined to form a successful urban area. And that's what you see in this idea of the pattern field, that it's about combining them. They have relations with each other. And it's just a combination that allows us to imagine these new solutions for urban areas. And patterns can connect between each other in different ways. It's not always like a one way of relationality. So it could be that one pattern contains another pattern, so that it's nested on it. It could be that two patterns are complementary, so one needs the other to perform correctly. It could be that patterns solve different problems, but they kind of coexist in the same spatial condition. So there's some synergy, but at the same time they address different questions. It could be that two patterns solve the same problem in a different way. So it's about design alternatives. In this case, for example, the question of context. So in certain contexts, a solution could be one for the same problem, and in another context, a solution could be another. And patterns can also imply a different level of connection, so that let's say the question of preconditions, so that one pattern it might be a precondition for another set of patterns to actually exist. And what is important is that in the end, looking at that kind of complicated, complex way of connecting patterns that is not always the same kind of relationality, is that patterns in themselves are not strong solutions. What is the strength of it is the network of solutions. So we did in our case, in our process of designing the let's say processing our evidence in the cities of making project, we did our own pattern language. So basically, as a group in a co-creative mode, we started to put on table, annotate our conclusions following the pattern kind of model. And of course, at the beginning, we had maybe more than 100 patterns, 130 patterns, because they were made very much discipline-based, and maybe unidimensional. But the discussion was about how do we indeed find these ways of integrating the disciplines, bringing patterns together, and that kind of creates some innovation as well. Something that was also important is that in this pattern language is that some patterns were based on the let's say the identification or the putting forward solutions which have proved to be successful as well, or that are existing, but others are about ambitions, they're about values, they're about things we want to achieve. Also based in evidence in the sense of when, this has worked in other contexts, therefore we can hypothesize it can work here as well. So there's a level of evidence collection, but also of projective character that it allowed to design eventually a solution. And this has to do with the patterns were organized according to the 3 dimensions. So according to how much although they're 3 of them address the question of urban integration, circularity, and people and policy. Of course, each one of them has one of these dimensions has more weight on them. So you can classify them according to them. And I guess you also know this approach of how do you define this pattern card when you have an image which can represent the pattern in a way that in a language that is, let's say, doesn't give you a very specific spatial solution. It's more like an inspiration or an explanation. It doesn't condition you to a certain form, for example. It's about relations on space, for example. There's a title which is appealing, catchy, easy to remember. There is a hypothesis, which is what the pattern does, and a connection with the other patterns. So which patterns are connected to each other. The patterns, the cards, were accompanied by a book, which I have here. I will show it to you later, which had a bigger explanation of each pattern, the pattern book. And there you have different elements which are important also to explain or to use a pattern. You have a context, which is the condition under which the problem that you are dealing with to emerge. You have the problem, a specific problem. So let's say, what is the situation that you want to resolve? You have forces, which is conditions that could undermine your intentions or that could actually help you to achieve them. So let's say certain building regulations could be a limitation to implement certain pattern. And that's something that you can include in that kind of forces to be aware of the difficulties you will find when implementing some of these choices. And then you have solutions which are indeed based on evidence. You find other references of cases in which some of these solutions of this pattern affords can be seen and can be used for inspiration, and also connects to other patterns as well. So let's say the solutions that you are talking about also are multidimensional and let's say multi-pattern. They kind of address different patterns. In our case, we had indeed patterns organized as well according to the building, to the urban integration, and they were organized by scale, for the scale of the building, the block, the neighborhood, city, and some of them were multi-scalar, so they were kind of across scales. And also they were organized according to these three conditions of, for example, the question of sharing space, sharing resources, the question of transitions, how do you make transitions between functions, and the question of taking advantage of the place conditions. And indeed, this pattern, which you can see here, which is about what you can see very well, but it's about a courtyard for logistics, and in itself doesn't tell too much. But then you start seeing the connections. It's about indeed, okay, organizing functions around a courtyard, inside the courtyard, leaving the outside of the street for other functions. So therefore creating a bit of a transition between street and manufacturing. Also the idea of transition spaces. This about the idea of centralized place for storage, so that in the end you can create this courtyard in which many companies are around it, as a place where people can store, or in the meantime use space for component storage, and which supports questions of circularity, supports questions of leaving up space for other functions. So this kind of pattern language allows to kind of understand the implications and the possibilities of implementing one solution in the built environment. What also is, let's say, important is that these patterns, some of them are highly spatial. So they're about the built environment, they're about blocks, buildings, and doors, windows, but some of them are more abstract. They are about policy situations. They are about, values. But since they are connected, one can always bring down those abstractions into the specifics of the built environment. So you can also identify locations which may have potential for something to happen. It's about affordances. It's not that you can guarantee something will happen, but you can define that this location may have the possibilities for that to occur. Finally, I will talk about, so once you get into the pattern language as a way to develop together a vision or a design, is how can you use pattern language as a way to developing a strategy for the implementation of it, which is another story. So in this case, the work by this student, Thomas van Dalhausen, who he wanted to his question was about how can we improve the mobility of a border region in which, this is the border of Netherlands with Belgium, with Liechtenstein, with Germany, different stakeholders, different nations, and therefore there is a lot of administrative barriers to achieve cross-border mobility. So he used the pattern language to achieve, to guide the strategy making process and to improve this cross-border context. So he first developed a vision. So what he thinks this future could look like in terms of facilitating mobility between and new economic opportunities across the border. And he then built this in a very complex theory of urban transitions and a framework, which allow him to understand that certain things must happen at different moments in the process of strategy making and implementation. That some things are elements that activate a process and therefore allow for some other patterns to be activated and be implemented. So that to promote the transition. So and there were several things that were important in terms of why a pattern language here in this cross-border international context is about a difference in language and culture, difference in institutional administrative processes, economic differences as well. So based on that, he did this, he organized the patterns in this way, which you cannot read so well, but there is you know, patterns which are the kind of the setting the ground, preparing the field for action. Some patterns are about I would say firing up the process, so starting it, kick-starting it, and some of them are for stabilizing and to kind of stabilize and make things long-lasting in the territory. He did a similar process as Noah. So he didn't make a workshop with real stakeholders, but he provided another group of peer students with a character, a persona, and showing them what is their role, what is their ambition, what is their idea of the territory. And with that, the goal was not to reach a solution, physical solution, but was based on certain strategy. How do we make it possible? How do we implement it? And they come up with this pattern field, which is more a pattern field of implementation. So basically, they organize, okay, to achieve the final goal, which is the one on the last end. First, we need to implement these two patterns. These are fundamental. And after these patterns are set, then we can actually build on them and achieve our idea of this vision for the territory. So with that, I will conclude. And what I hope that I have conveyed to you is how versatile the pattern language can be. That once you get into the mode of thinking through patterns, it can be used for many different reasons, many purposes, simply for informing others, in a way, it's almost a didactic tool to make people aware of the importance of spatial design and planning tools, to actually achieve people who have no knowledge and no prior experience in design to contribute to the design process, so that in the end, all the, let's say, the years of study in a specific discipline are condensed in a few patterns, and therefore the threshold lowers and people can actually contribute with imagination and creativity to a process. And that if we take it seriously, indeed, and prepare for this, it can be quite impactful and provide very meaningful insights in any process of planning and design.
Thank you so much for the presentation. So I have a question related to the point whereby the application of the knowledge exchange between the municipalities, the 13 municipalities, because I thought the patterns are to a specific context or to a specific area, and then to get probably maybe some methodology which is created that can be applied, or the exact patterns of a certain of a study, or other ones which were applied to the different municipalities, because in relation to the second last part, whereby there was co-designing, there the two areas are working together to create patterns. So I wanted to know on the municipalities? Was it a methodology applied to the different municipalities or the patterns created?
So we tested the validity of our patterns with them, and it was a way to understand if we were in the right direction. But the way that I find very interesting what you say about the context. Indeed, like patterns are contextual. So you have 13 municipalities. How do you deal with that? No, how can a pattern language be valid for that? So the interesting thing about the discussion was that the municipalities were kind of each one of them rating the patterns according to priority, to how well if they had worked or didn't work, if they have used them, no? And it happened that for some municipalities, a pattern had worked. And for others, they didn't see the importance of it, or it didn't work in their context. So the pattern became a way to start a conversation and to, let's say, it becomes like a kind of a starter for a conversation, and then they can reflect on why some things work, why it didn't work, or even convince others that maybe you should look into this because actually for us it works. So why don't make a bit of more research and maybe or look at your policy to see how actually you can implement certain things. So it was a way of let's say of not so much of getting solutions out of that, but more about exchanging knowledge. So the pattern language became that tool of exchanging knowledge.
As a group, we looked at the different patterns from Chitintale, and we picked the things that we felt identify to the place. And from there, we scaled them down, and we came up with this. So I could go from the street scale. We have the pathways that are within the space and road geometry, which you see as you walk through Chitintale. Then on the neighborhood scale, we looked at the drainage, which acts as boundaries, and also you find that in this drainage, you have paths, which brings us back to the pathways. Then they had different cultures that created boundaries and these different zones within the place. And then we identified from these culture boundaries, we had different age groups, which are the young, the youth, the old people within the place. So we have a zone where you find adults, and then you find another area like the skate park where you're finding the kids and the youth who actually addressed us and told us of the different activities that they have in that place. Then the youth told us about how they make money in this place and how they create workshops to earn. And these spaces also become meeting spaces for the people within Chitintale and everyone who's coming to visit. Then we have the image of the place, which has to do a lot with how you identify Chitintale, because it's different from another place, with the murals, with the graffiti that they have, the materials they use. And then we looked at the fact that they have social education. This is because they have a library. There are very few communities where you find a library and where people are actually actively studying.
And then that tells you that you need what you need to work towards to make it possible. To what knowledge you need more, because say you talk about very interesting things about this place is very creative, lots of creativity, lots of activities happen there. But I would like to know more what kind of activities actually are happening. And also, you can also propose what activities you would like to have that they happen, or the community would like to happen, because maybe some things cannot happen because there's no space for it, no? But the community will want to. So that also is a way to kind of to bridge that idea of programming with in the case of this multifunctional space that could support that. But then each one of these activities at the same time has certain spatial requirements. So let's say you want to have tables, or what you need depends on what the activity. So when you have this listing of activities, you can define the special needs, and those special needs will then accommodate it in that multifunctional building. And what is interesting is that some of these is that maybe the location of the design of the building will have connection with some of these patterns of the that are about the the existing conditions. But then also, I'm bringing here, for example, that is, this image of the place, that the implication is that this could become eventually, like an economy for the place, because, so therefore your project becomes like a catalyzer for possible other patterns that could happen there.
Hello everyone, my name is Erica Nakawesa and I'm a student at the International University of East Africa, taking part in the pattern language course, and we received an important guest from the Netherlands, Dr. Victor Munõz, and some of the things he taught us were cities of making, patterns acting as integrators, and patterns acting as co-creation tools. And after which, he went ahead to look at some of the patterns that we had developed in different groups and gave us some of the ideas, which included looking at the visions and how we can adapt to the patterns that we had created and be able to implement them in the projects that we are trying to come up with. Thank you for watching. See you next time.